want to talk about why I believe prisons can become points of departure and not just dead ends, and how having a college program in a prison can make that happen. The first time I ever went into a women's prison, I admit I was a bit nervous, although it wasn't what you'd expect, an imposing building set off in the middle of nowhere. Instead, I took the subway from uptown Manhattan to Chelsea, and I walked west past high-end boutiques and galleries, where I was more likely to see a celebrity than a person in prison, until I reached a drab 6-story building on the West Side Highway. I was there to teach a class on women and citizenship in US history. It was a college class I'd taught before, although never in a prison. And I didn't realize it at the time, but probably part of the reason I was there had to do with my family. Growing up, it had been an open secret, never fully discussed, that my mother's sister had been in prison. No one in my extended and tight-knit family spoke with my aunt, except for my mom. My aunt had burned too many bridges over the years. When I grew older, I heard stories, how my aunt had been involved with an abusive man, how she'd stolen all my grandmother's valuable possessions, how she stole from people's homes and from banks. She went to prison for grand larceny. While she was there, she missed my mother's wedding, and years later, she missed my grandmother's funeral. When she got out of prison, she struggled. Most of the phone calls to my mom were to ask for money. Maybe my students had similar stories to my aunt's, but I didn't ask them that day. Instead, I asked them to define what citizenship meant to them. And one woman said, "It means having a voice or a say in what goes on in your country or where you live." But the women in the prison had very little say about what went on where they currently lived. And even when they got out, they could be barred from voting or housing if they had a felony conviction. Prison for women like my aunt, or for my students, is often not just a dead end, but an absence from citizenship, an absence from the bonds of family and community, an absence of possibility and hope. For a few hours every week in class, we did not dwell on absence. Instead, we asked difficult questions about American history. Why were slaves counted as 3/5 of a person in the US Constitution until the Civil War? What were the successes and failures of the suffrage movement, the first movement for women to gain the right to vote? These were the stories that mattered. At the end of the semester, unprompted by me, the women created a document they called the Women's Commandments. They were inspired by the radicals, reformers, and dreamers we had read about throughout the semester to create their own collective definition of citizenship. The Women's Commandments included things like health care, the right to be free from violence, but at the very top they had written, to empower women through education. For my students in the prison, citizenship was unimaginable without it. I didn't teach again in a women's prison for over 10 years. I was too busy working as a professor. Then I came out to Washington on a fellowship, and a professor invited me to come here to the Washington Corrections Center for Women. Inside the prison, I met a remarkable group of women who were passionate about going to college. Together, we started talking about how could we build a college program together. Within a few months, the Freedom Education Project Puget Sound was born. Within a few years, women were working toward their Associate of Arts and Science degree. I felt galvanized. I felt like I was doing what I'd wanted to do all those years ago when I taught my class in New York. I wanted to work with women, maybe because I thought about my aunt, but also because I could see the disparities between the men's and women's prisons. Here in Washington, men in prison had been able to go to college for years. Why shouldn't women have the same opportunity? Women in prison might be just a small proportion of the total prison population, but they are the fastest growing. If you give a person in prison an opportunity to get an education, they're 43% less likely to return to prison. And that's from a study conducted by the RAND Corporation in 2013. And it is certainly compelling and convincing. I could also introduce you to women I've met here at the prison who've taken college classes with us and since left. They're students at the University of Washington, at Antioch College. They're working full-time, and they're on the dean's list. Probably there's a college student at this prison sitting next to you or near you right now. Would everybody who's part of our college program here at the prison raise your hand? You, more than anything, show how college can start to make prisons a point of departure. I also wanted to work with women because I think a lot about mothers and their children. My aunt gave birth in prison. The baby was taken away from her, and she never saw him again. That loss haunted her her entire life. Years later, when she got out, she had another child, my cousin. But my cousin was also plagued by problems. She spent time in psychiatric facilities, group homes. Much later, she was involved with abusive men. It seemed like the cycle was just repeating itself. I know that over 80% of the women who take our college classes at this prison are mothers too. And it seems so important to me for their children, their sons and daughters, to see them going to college, even in a place like this, and for their child to say, I also might go to college, instead of ending up in a prison like so many kids with incarcerated parents do. There's a proverb that says, if you educate a man, you educate an individual. If you educate a woman, you educate a nation. And I really believe that's true. I also knew that it hadn't always been this way, with just a handful of college programs in prisons around the country. In fact, not too long ago, college and prison flourished all over the United States. They were funded by Pell Grants, federal need-based financial aid for low-income students. And women in prison and men were eligible to apply. And even though people in prison were just 1% of the total recipients of federal Pell money, and even though their application did not decrease the total amount of money available, in 1994, Congress voted to eliminate all federal funding for college and prison. It was a tough-on-crime period. Within a year, 350 college programs closed. Washington followed suit and banned all state public funds for college and prison. And that's where we are today. But there is another way. In just a few years since we've been offering college classes at this prison, we've had over 250 women take our classes. We've done it with the support of foundations and individuals and amazing professors all over the state who believe in the work we're doing. They know that it makes a woman in prison more engaged and gives her more possibilities when she gets out. So what do we do? To men and women in prison, I would urge you to ask the administration of the prison to offer college classes taught by people from universities. Yes, you can be a cosmetologist or a horticulturist, but why can't you imagine being a scientist or a writer? Even a horticulturist and a cosmetologist will go that much farther with a college degree. It's working in this prison, and it can work elsewhere. To educators, I would urge you to go into a prison and teach a college class that's of the same quality and rigor that you would at your home institution. Unfortunately, there are so many prisons around our country that you won't have trouble finding one to teach in. But then, go back to your campus and tell your deans and your presidents to find ways to bring formerly incarcerated people onto your campuses and to bring at-risk high school students to college so that they don't end up in prison in the first place. As a teacher in a prison, you won't have fancy technology and you won't have the internet, but you also won't have students texting on their phones or surfing the web while you're talking. Sometimes you'll give a student an assignment to read one chapter by the next class, and she'll come back having read that chapter, the entire book, and 5 other related books she found in the prison library. You'll see students go out of their way to help each other, especially those who are struggling, because they know that no one succeeds unless they all succeed. To all of you, I would ask, can we imagine differently? Can we imagine a woman in prison as a college student, and not just an offender, someone defined solely by her crime? Can we imagine a world where everyone has the right to a quality education no matter where you live? Most people do get out of prison. My aunt got out of prison. Don't we want them to be educated citizens? Back in New York, when I taught that class, from the single window on the 6th story of the prison, if you looked out, you could see the Statue of Liberty. And it really bothered a lot of my students that they had to look at a visible symbol of freedom from behind bars. But one day, a woman wrote to me in a paper, "Being able to take college classes, to me, is similar to emancipation." My goal as a professor who runs a college program in a prison is to put myself out of business. I imagine a time when I'm no longer necessary, because there are so many women going to college and a prison that they're leaving and they're not coming back, and then they aren't coming here in the first place. Instead, they're out there in the world. They're policymakers, they're engineers, they're scientists, writers, teachers, social workers, change makers, leaders. When that happens, I think we will have made prisons a point of departure. Thank you.